Hello everyone. In today's class, we will talk about the gross anatomy of the muscular system. The muscular system comprises of the muscles or the muscle tissue of the body. There are three muscles in the body: the smooth muscle, the cardiac muscle, and the skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle fibers do not have striations, and so they are called smooth muscle. They are arranged in multi-unit or single unit type of smooth muscle. They are present in the viscera or the soft parts of the body, particularly lining the hollow tubular organs like trachea, GI tract, vas deferens, reproductive system, urinary system, etc. They are also forming the bulk of the organs like uterus, urinary bladder. When we come to cardiac muscle, the unique feature of cardiac muscle cells is that they are forming a syncytium. That means the adjacent cardiac muscles are fused to form a syncytium and they are connected by gap junctions. We could say that cardiac muscle is in between the features of smooth muscle and the skeletal muscle. Now coming to the skeletal muscle. About half of the person's body weight, there are 700 different types of skeletal muscles in our body. The skeletal muscles are doing three major important functions in the body. Number one is movement. Number two is posture and equilibrium. And number three is thermogenesis. Skeletal muscles, as the name suggests, are attached to the skeleton, that is bone or the cartilage. When we look at the skeletal muscle, the gross appearance of it will be striated. That means it has alternating dark and the light bands. These are the bands which I was telling are missing in the smooth muscle. The skeletal muscle, because it is attached to the skeleton and the muscles are crossing across the joints and attached to the bones, when they shorten or contract, they are able to move the joints and hence they are able to produce movement. The movements produced by the skeletal muscle are, if you see grossly, two types: the fine movement and the coarse movement. Students, remember, fine movements means those movements which you do with your fingers, your lips, the facial muscles and the toes of your feet. Like for example, writing, painting, smiling, these are the fine movements. In contrast, coarse movements means those movements which you perform using bigger joints like wrist joint, elbow joint, shoulder joint, hip joint, like walking, playing tennis or cooking. These are coarse movements. Now, coming to the second function of the skeletal muscle. The second function I said is posture and equilibrium. The skeletal muscles in the back of our spine and in the lower limbs, what are they doing? They are continuously under a state of contraction and they are maintaining an erect position for us. If not for this movement of the skeletal muscle, we would have fallen to the forces of the gravity. We would never have maintained an erect posture like this. The best example I can tell you is whenever you are looking at this video or I am looking at you, my neck is continuously under contraction or else my head would have dropped like this, right? So the posture and equilibrium means when I'm shifting between postures, like I'm dancing, I'm running very fast, I'm swimming. So I should not lose the equilibrium on both sides of the body. So posture and equilibrium maintenance is the second most important function of the skeletal muscles. The third function is thermogenesis. The skeletal muscle cells produce heat during the process of contraction, and this heat is responsible to maintain the body temperature. You must have seen whenever we get fever and we have chills, so the muscles contract vigorously in order to produce more heat. There is yet another function of skeletal muscle which is not usually there, like when you are malnourished, you are on fasting. Then what happens? The skeletal muscles break down and they give the protein to the body. That means skeletal muscles are the reserves for protein and potassium in the body. Having known about the functions of the skeletal muscle, let us see how a skeletal muscle looks like. Say if you look at your biceps brachiae muscle in your arm, you see that it is a rounded belly and it is a whole muscle which you can take into your hands. But microscopically, what is this made up of? It is made up of some thousands and thousands of muscle fibers called myofibers. The body is basically composed of cells, all we know that, but when a cell is elongated and thread-like, it is called a fiber. Similar to this, there are many cells which are comprising the biceps muscle, and because all the muscle cells are elongated and they are called fibers, the muscle is getting ultimately its shape. So the myofibers, that means the cells of the muscle, each myofiber is surrounded by a connective tissue layer called endomysium. These muscle fibers are grouped into fascicles, and such fascicles are in turn covered by a connective tissue sheath called perimysium. So in a given muscle, there could be 2 or 3 or many fascicles, and all the fascicles are grouped together and bound by a common connective tissue outside called epimysium. So it goes like this: an epimysium covering the entire muscle. If you cut and open and see, there are different fascicles each covered by perimysium, and in each fascicle there are different muscle fibers each covered by endomysium. If we trace the connective tissue fibers to the ends of the skeletal muscle, they will narrow down into tendons or ligaments, or they merge into the connective tissue of the body. The tendons or the ligaments which are helping the attachment of the muscle to a joint or to a bone are the connections or the continuations from the connective tissue sheaths which are surrounding the muscle cells. You can see broadly two types of tendons. Few tendons are rounded and they are inserting into a joint or into a bone in a specific location, like an Achilles tendon. But few tendons are flattened, like the tendon of the triceps muscle. So when the tendons are flattened, we call them as aponeurosis. Coming to the blood supply and the nerve supply of the skeletal muscle. The skeletal muscles are supplied by somatic nerves coming from the spinal cord segments. We were talking about the biceps brachiae, and so let us see what is the nerve which is supplying the biceps. The musculocutaneous nerve that supplies the biceps is a pure motor nerve. It is somatic nerve which is coming from the spinal cord segment, say C6 and C7. The nerve which is supplying the skeletal muscle carries axons. The axons, when they come and they pierce the epimysium and enter into the skeletal muscle, they divide into many branches and supply different muscle fibers. I told you in the previous class that a neuron or a motor neuron in the spinal cord, its axon and its terminal branches and the muscle fibers it supplies all together constitutes a motor unit. Students, you should not get confused between a motor unit and a fascicle. Okay, fascicle is an anatomical organization, so different groups of muscle fibers arranged in bundles. But a motor unit means a nerve fiber, it can divide into multiple branches and supply myofibers or muscle fibers in different fascicles also. They need not be in a single fascicle. Okay. Coming to the blood supply of the skeletal muscle. The arteries supply the skeletal muscle and they are the main source of the nutrients to the muscle, because the muscle which is contracting requires a continuous supply of energy in the form of glucose or fatty acids. If oxygen is available, then the muscle goes into the aerobic type of metabolism, and if oxygen is not there, then the muscle goes into anaerobic type of metabolism, wherein the muscle takes ATP from the reserve. That means the glucose which is present already in the skeletal muscle in the form of glycogen is broken down and it is subjected to anaerobic metabolism where pyruvic acid is formed, giving energy for the muscle contraction. So, arterial supply to a skeletal muscle is important in supplying the nutrients, whereas the venous supply is important in taking back the metabolites of the muscle contraction, like the lactic acid and the acid, that is H plus protons, which are generated during the contraction. If the venous supply of a skeletal muscle is problematic, is blocked, then what happens? The metabolites will stay in the muscle, and the muscle, there will be intense pain because of deposition of lactic acid. Also, the veins which are draining the blood from the skeletal muscle, few veins are there inside the muscle in the belly and few are outside the muscle. And the ones which are inside the muscle are the veins which are responsible to add the blood to the cardiovascular system in the form of venous return. If you remember, we have seen the muscle pump and the thoracic pump are the two major pumps which determine the venous return to the heart. So the veins which are there inside the muscle tissue are subjected to contraction when the muscle is also contracting, and this pushes the blood towards the heart. There are lymphatic vessels also which are draining the skeletal muscle. If there is some damage to the skeletal muscle and the blood or the venous blood is getting accumulated inside a particular fascicle, and the muscles in a particular limb, because they are arranged or they are uh, divided by tough connective tissue sheets called fascia. So whenever there is an injury occurring to a muscle, the collected blood can get accumulated inside a compartment or inside a fascial sheath, and that gives rise to intense pain. And this is what we call as compartment syndrome. This is arising basically by the way the muscles are arranged. So in a limb, say for example lower limb, around a bone, all the skeletal muscles are arranged in groups, those which are doing a particular function. Like for example, the skeletal muscles which are helping in flexion, they are arranged in a group. Those muscles which are doing a function of inversion or reversion or extension, they are arranged in a certain other group. And these groups are separated by thick connective tissue sheets. So because the muscles are grouped into compartments around a bone in a particular limb, and the blood vessels are flowing or moving, or for example the blood vessels are piercing through the compartment or through the deep facial layers. So in case of injury, blood gets collected in the same compartment, and that gives rise to intense pain. So this finishes our talk on the gross anatomy of skeletal.